Look at this geezer. Bet he can't even see the target, much less hit it. The sneering voice of a young man in tactical gear cut through the steady rhythm of gunfire at Ridgeline Shooting Complex. Jackson Miller, 72, didn't react as he methodically cleaned his simple, well-worn Glock 19, each movement precise and economical. The range had been relatively peaceful this Saturday morning until the arrival of a group of loud, gear-heavy enthusiasts who seemed more interested in their expensive equipment than proper technique. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The young man who'd spoken, Tanner, according to the patch, on his tactical vest, strutted closer, clearly enjoying the attention from his equally boisterous friends. "Hey, Grandpa, that pea-shooter even work anymore? You might want to try something with less kick." He nodded toward his own custom AR-15, adorned with various unnecessary attachments. Jackson continued his meticulous preparation, checking the sights, loading the magazine with practiced efficiency. His weathered hands moved with surprising steadiness, his expression remaining impassive behind standard-issue shooting glasses and ear protection. "Seriously, old-timer," Tanner persisted, lowering his voice to a mock whisper. "The retirement home bus make a wrong turn? This isn't bingo night." His friends snickered appreciatively. Tanner stopped mid-laugh, his eyes narrowing as he spotted something on Jackson's forearm when the older man reached for his ammunition box. A faded tattoo, small and almost invisible against his sun-weathered skin. What's that supposed to be? Some kind of bird? Eagle? He leaned closer, trying to make it out. "Navy guy, huh? Let me guess, you swabbed decks during Vietnam." Jackson finally straightened, his movements unhurried, yet somehow conveying absolute control. He turned slowly, his gaze steady behind his shooting glasses, meeting Tanner's mocking stare. The young man faltered slightly under that unwavering scrutiny. One of the range safety officers, Garrett, stepped over. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone professional, but with an undercurrent of warning directed at Tanner. Tanner, emboldened by his friends watching, puffed his chest. "Just making conversation with our senior citizen here, offering some friendly advice." "Mr. Miller doesn't need advice," Garrett said quietly, "and he's here to shoot, not talk." "Miller, huh?" Tanner scoffed. "Well, Mr. Miller better not have a heart attack when his little pistol goes bang." Another man from Tanner's group, older, perhaps mid-30s, had been watching the exchange with growing discomfort. As Jackson turned back to his station and began to set up his target, this man caught a clearer glimpse of the faded tattoo. His expression shifted from amusement to something closer to shock. "Tanner," he said sharply, "that's enough. Let the man shoot in peace." "What? I'm just... enough." The man's tone left no room for argument. "If you believe that true skill speaks louder than any boast, type silent mastery below." Jackson Miller was a creature of habit, a man built on precision and ritual. For 12 years, since moving to the small town of Clearwater after decades spent in places that didn't appear on any civilian maps, he'd visited Ridgeline Shooting Complex every Saturday morning, arriving precisely at 8 a.m. when the range opened. The staff knew him as the quiet, elderly gentleman who requested the same lane each week, paid in exact change, and never wasted a single round. His shooting routine never varied. He would begin with slow, deliberate shots at 7 yards, gradually increasing the distance to 25 yards by the end of his session. No rapid fire, no fancy drills, just methodical, focused shooting that displayed a level of fundamentals rarely seen even among competition shooters. His groupings were always tight, his aim unerring, yet he never seemed satisfied studying each target with critical attention before making minute adjustments to his stance or grip. Jackson was as much a fixture at Ridgeline as the building itself. The staff respected his privacy and his obvious skill, though few knew anything about his background. He wasn't one for small talk. A courteous nod served as both greeting and farewell. His interactions were minimal, functional, yet never impolite. He simply was a constant, predictable presence in the shifting weekend crowds of the popular shooting range. His appearance gave little away about his past. Always dressed in simple, practical clothing, faded jeans, muted button-up shirts with sleeves rolled to the elbows in warmer weather, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle unusual for a man his age. His white hair, once dark as coal, was kept short in a style that hadn't changed in 50 years. His face, deeply lined and weathered from a lifetime spent largely outdoors, rarely betrayed emotion, though his eyes, a striking pale blue, missed nothing. The slight tremor in a novice shooter's hands, a safety violation 3 lanes down, the subtle hesitation of someone uncomfortable with their firearm. Jackson observed it all in silence. This quiet, almost invisible man was an enigma even to those who saw him weekly. They knew him as Mr. Miller, the elderly regular who could outshoot men a third his age. They had no inkling of the calluses on his soul or the significance of the faded tattoo usually hidden beneath his sleeve, a small, stylized trident with an eagle perched atop it. This symbol, to a select few who understood its meaning, spoke volumes about who Jackson Miller had been, the elite unit he had served with, and the classified operations that had defined his earlier life. He valued the anonymity of his current existence, the simple rhythm of civilian life. It was a stark contrast to his former career, where split-second decisions determined whether men lived or died, where silence was survival, and where a routine day could erupt into chaos without warning. The shooting range provided a connection to his past skills without the stakes or the stress. It was therapeutic, grounding, or had been until recently, when a new breed of shooter started frequenting Ridgeline. Louder, brasher, more concerned with looking tactical than being precise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tanner was typical of this new crowd, young men who'd watched too many action movies and YouTube videos, who wore more gear than most operators did in actual combat zones, who confused volume with authority and equipment with skill. His expensive AR-15, festooned with attachments he barely understood how to use properly, cost more than Jackson's entire collection of well-maintained, no-frills firearms. As Jackson set up his first target, a simple silhouette without the zombie or terrorist imagery favored by Tanner's group, he was acutely aware of being watched, not just by Tanner, who had fallen into sullen silence after being reprimanded, but by the older man who had intervened. This one was different. There was recognition in his eyes, not just of Jackson's tattoo, but of its significance. Jackson had noticed such looks occasionally over the years and had learned to ignore them. His life now was about blending in, not standing out. The older man from Tanner's group, Davis, Jackson had heard someone call him, maintained a respectful distance but continued observing as Jackson began his shooting routine. 7 yards, slow fire, each shot deliberate and precise. The grouping that formed in the center mass of the target was tight enough that the holes began to overlap, forming a ragged single hole no bigger than a $50. Tanner, still smarting from being silenced earlier, couldn't resist commenting loud enough to be heard, even through ear protection. Big deal. Anybody can shoot that close. Jackson, unperturbed, simply pressed the button to send his target back to 15 yards. His next grouping was equally precise, the bullets finding their mark with metronomic consistency. No wasted motion, no flashy stance, just the fundamentals executed with a level of mastery that came from tens of thousands of rounds downrange in conditions far more stressful than a climate-controlled shooting range. Davis moved closer, watching with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was witnessing. After Jackson completed his sequence at 25 yards, maintaining groupings that most shooters couldn't achieve at half that distance, Davis approached him during a reload. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller," he said, his tone respectful, removing his ear protection. "I just wanted to apologize for my friend earlier. He doesn't know any better." Jackson nodded once, acknowledging both, the apology and the implied understanding that there was something to apologize for. "I'm Mike Davis," the man continued, "former Marine, 2nd Recon Battalion." He paused, clearly debating how direct to be. "That's some impressive shooting. Reminds me of techniques they showed us at SOTG." Jackson's expression remained neutral, but something flickered briefly in his eyes. Recognition of the acronym for Special Operations Training Group. "Appreciate the comment," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble from years of disuse. "And the intervention with your friend." Davis nodded, seeming to understand Jackson's preference for brevity. "Mind if I ask where you served?" "Navy," Jackson replied simply. "Long time ago." This minimal response seemed to confirm something. For Davis, he glanced briefly at Jackson's forearm, where the tattoo was now covered by his sleeve. "Well, it's an honor to shoot alongside you, sir," he said, with the deference of someone who understood exactly what that faded tattoo represented. "If you ever feel like sharing any pointers, I'd be grateful." Jackson studied him for a moment, then gave another slight nod. "Fundamentals matter more than equipment," he offered, a general principle that nonetheless carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. As Davis returned to his lane, Tanner approached him. What was that about? Getting shooting tips from Grandpa? Davis fixed him with a stern look. "That Grandpa has forgotten more about marksmanship than you'll ever know, kid. Show some respect." "Ma, for what?" "So he can hit a paper target. Big deal." "The way he shoots," Davis said quietly, "isn't something you learn at a civilian range. That's the kind of precision that comes from places where missing means someone doesn't come home." He glanced back at Jackson, now methodically firing. Another perfect sequence. That tattoo on his arm, it's not some random Navy ink, it's a trident. The man was a SEAL. Tanner's expression shifted from dismissal to disbelief. "No way. That old guy? Not just any SEAL," Davis continued, his voice dropping further. "The eagle on the trident, that's old school. Vietnam era, maybe early post-Vietnam, when the teams were still in the shadows, doing the kind of operations that still haven't been declassified." The information seemed to momentarily silence even Tanner's brash confidence. He stared at Jackson with new eyes, reassessing the lean, elderly man whose movements, now that he really looked, carried a deliberate economy that spoke of ingrained training. Word spread quietly among the other shooters at Ridgeline that morning. Subtle glances were cast in Jackson's direction. The excessive chatter from Tanner's group diminished to respectful murmurs. Even the range safety officers, who had always treated Jackson with professional courtesy, seemed to stand a little straighter when passing his lane. Jackson himself gave no indication of noticing this shift in atmosphere. He continued his methodical practice, shot after perfect shot, his focus unwavering, his routine unaltered. But there was a weight to the silence that fell around him, a tangible sense of respect that hadn't been there before. As the morning progressed, other shooters began to subtly modify their behavior in his presence. Magazines were loaded more carefully. Safety protocols were followed with heightened attention. Conversations became more subdued, more focused on technique than gear or action movie scenarios. One young woman, a police officer named Rivera, who frequently practiced at Ridgeline, had been struggling with her qualification course at the far end of the range. After several frustrated attempts, she gathered her courage and approached Jackson during a break in his shooting. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller," she began hesitantly. "I don't mean to bother you, but I'm having trouble with my follow-through on longer shots. I've tried everything my department instructor suggested, but I can't seem to get consistent groups beyond 15 yards. Jackson studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he set down his pistol, ensuring it was, pointed downrange with the action open, and stepped back from his station. "Show me your stance," he said simply. Officer Rivera moved into her shooting position, raising her service weapon toward the target. Jackson observed with a critical eye, then made a small adjustment to her grip, rotating her support hand slightly. "Too much tension here," he said, indicating her forearms. "And you're anticipating recoil, breaking your wrist down before the shot breaks." His instruction was minimal but precise, focusing on fundamentals rather than quick fixes. He demonstrated, once his own form perfect despite his age, then stepped back to let her try again. The improvement in her next grouping was immediate and significant. That's amazing," she said, examining her target with surprise. "I've been struggling with this for months." Jackson nodded once. "Fundamentals don't age," he said quietly. "They don't change with new equipment or tactics. Master them, everything else follows." It was perhaps the longest speech anyone at Ridgeline had ever heard him give. As Officer Rivera thanked him and returned to her lane, visibly more confident, Garrett, the range safety officer, approached. "That was a nice thing you did," he commented. Jackson shrugged slightly. "She needed help, had the right attitude." Garrett hesitated, then added, "Mr. Davis mentioned your background. Hope that doesn't make things uncomfortable for you here." "Doesn't matter," Jackson replied. "Past is past." But something had shifted in the atmosphere of Ridgeline shooting. Complex. Word of the elderly former SEAL with the perfect marksmanship spread quickly among the regular patrons. Soon, Jackson noticed subtle changes in how he was treated, not just respect, which had always been there, but a certain reverence. Younger shooters would make way for him when he arrived, ensuring his preferred lane was available. More experienced ones would watch his technique from a respectful distance, trying to absorb something of his mastery through observation alone. What surprised him most, however, was the change in Tanner and his friends. The young man's initial mockery had been replaced by an awkward, almost embarrassed deference. He still wore all his tactical gear, still brought his over-accessorized AR-15, but now he would observe Jackson with careful attention, attempting to mimic his methodical approach, his economy of movement, his patient focus on fundamentals. Jackson found himself in an unexpected position. After decades of anonymity, of blending into the background, he had become something of a reluctant mentor at Ridgeline. He never sought this role, never offered unsolicited advice, yet increasingly found himself approached by shooters of all skill levels, asking brief, specific questions about their technique. His responses remained minimal, practical. He wasn't one for long explanations or theoretical discussions. Instead, he would demonstrate, allow the person to try, then make one or two crucial adjustments. This straightforward approach, devoid of ego or unnecessary complexity, proved remarkably effective. Those who received his guidance invariably saw immediate improvement. The management of Ridgeline noticed the change as well. The overall skill level and safety consciousness of their patrons had improved noticeably since Jackson's background had become known. Groupings were tighter, unnecessary chatter reduced, safety violations virtually eliminated. Jackson Miller's silent example had, without any intentional effort on his part, elevated the entire culture of the range. One Saturday, about a month after the initial incident with Tanner, Jackson arrived at his usual time to find an unexpected scene. The range was unusually crowded, with several unfamiliar faces among the regular weekend shooters. As he signed in, Garrett leaned over the counter. "Just so you know, Mr. Miller, there's a group of guys from Naval Special Warfare visiting today, some kind of informal competition or training thing." He hesitated. "They, heard about you. From one of our patrons. Hope that's not a problem." Jackson's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested a momentary tension. He hadn't had direct contact with active duty SEALs in years, had deliberately kept his distance from that world since retiring, but he merely nodded and proceeded to his usual lane, setting up his equipment with the same methodical precision he always showed. He was aware of being observed more intently than usual. The visiting SEALs, a group of about 8 men ranging from late 20s to early 40s, maintained a professional demeanor, but their interest was evident. They were engaged in what appeared to be a friendly marksmanship competition among themselves, displaying the impressive skill level expected of elite operators. Jackson focused on his own routine, ignoring the occasional glances cast his way. He worked through his progressions, from 7 yards to 25, each grouping as perfect as ever, each movement as economical and precise as it had been during his active duty days decades earlier. As he finished his final sequence, he became aware of a presence beside his lane. One of the SEALs, older than the others, with the bearing of a senior enlisted leader, stood watching, his expression one of professional assessment. "That's some impressive shooting, sir," the man said. "Master Chief Blackwood." He introduced himself without offering a hand, respecting Jackson's focus and the safety protocols of the range. Jackson nodded in acknowledgement, beginning to pack up his equipment. "Some of my guys were wondering if you'd mind sharing a few pointers," Blackwood continued. "We don't often get a chance to learn from someone with your experience." There was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis on the word experience, that suggested he knew exactly who Jackson had been, perhaps even specifics of his service that few would have access to. Jackson studied him for a long moment, then the younger SEALs, who were trying not to appear too interested in their conversation. He recognized something in them, not just their physical capabilities or technical skills, but a certain quality. In their eyes, the same look he had seen in his own teammates decades ago, a combination of absolute confidence and the humility that comes from confronting one's limitations daily. "Not much to share that you don't already know," he said finally. "With respect, sir," Blackwood replied, "there's always something to learn from those who came before, especially someone who served when the teams were still writing the book on what was possible." Jackson considered this, then gave a slight nod. "One demonstration," he conceded. "Basic principles only." Word spread quickly through the range. The regular patrons, already accustomed to watching Jackson from a distance, gathered at a respectful remove. Even Tanner and his friends positioned themselves where they could observe without intruding. The active duty SEALs arranged themselves behind lane 5, where Jackson set up a fresh target at 25 yards. Without preamble or explanation, he loaded his simple Glock 19, assumed his stance, and fired a sequence of 5 rounds. The grouping that formed in the center mass of the target was so tight it looked like a single ragged hole. Without pausing, he transitioned to headshots, placing another 5 rounds in a group the size of a $50 where the target's forehead would be. Then, still without breaking rhythm, he performed a rapid reload and fired a final sequence, placing 2 rounds center mass and 1 to the head of the target in under 2 seconds. A perfectly executed failure drill, or Mozambique, as it was sometimes called. The entire demonstration had taken less than 30 seconds. There had been no wasted motion, no dramatic flourishes, no concession to his age. Just pure, distilled skill, honed through countless repetitions in circumstances most civilians couldn't imagine. The range fell completely silent when he finished. Even the seasoned SEALs seemed momentarily at a loss for words, their professional assessment giving way to genuine admiration. "That's not standard Navy qualification shooting," one of the younger SEALs finally commented. Master Chief Blackwood's expression was knowing. "No, it's not," he agreed quietly. "That's something else entirely." He turned to Jackson. Would you mind showing my men your reload technique again, sir? That was smoother than anything I've seen." And so began an impromptu masterclass. Jackson, a man of few words his entire life, still didn't speak much. Instead, he demonstrated the perfect economy of his reload, the precise pressure of his trigger control, the subtle adjustments in stance that accounted for different distances. The active duty SEALs, already expert marksmen by any standard, watched with the focused attention of men who understood they were witnessing something exceptional. What impressed them most wasn't just Jackson's technical proficiency, though. That was remarkable enough, especially given his age. It was the absolute consistency of his performance. Every movement identical to the last, every shot breaking exactly as intended, a level of muscle memory and ingrained skill that spoke of decades of disciplined practice under the most demanding conditions imaginable. As the impromptu session continued, other patrons of the range looked on in fascination. Here was a man in his 70s, outperforming elite special operators at their physical prime, not through raw strength or speed, but through perfect technique and mental discipline that had not diminished with the years. "You mentioned you served in the teams, sir," one of the younger SEALs asked during a brief pause. "Long time ago," Jackson acknowledged. "Vietnam era?" Another ventured. Jackson's eyes, still sharp and penetrating despite his age, assessed the young operator. "After," he said simply. "Early programs, different time." The SEALs exchanged glances at Jackson's sparse comment about early programs. Those three words carried weight beyond their simplicity. A reference to classified operations during a shadowy period of naval special warfare history that predated most of their careers. Only Master Chief Blackwood seemed to fully grasp the significance, his expression shifting to one of deeper respect. "We'd be honored if you'd join us for our small competition," Blackwood said. "Nothing formal, just pushing each other to be better." Jackson hesitated. He had maintained his skills over the decades out of discipline and habit, not competitive. Drive. His routine at Ridgeline was private, meditative, a connection to his past without the weight of its complications. "Different generation," he replied. "Different methods." "Fundamentals don't change," Blackwood countered, deliberately echoing Jackson's own words to Officer Rivera weeks earlier. "And sometimes the old ways are still the best." Something in this simple acknowledgement seemed to reach Jackson. After a long moment, he gave a slight nod. "One course of fire," he conceded. The news rippled through the range. Regular patrons who had been preparing to leave delayed their departure. Garrett quietly extended Jackson's lane time without charging. Even Tanner and his friends positioned themselves where they could observe without intruding, their usual boisterousness subdued by the gravity of the moment. The competition was straightforward, a modified version of a qualification course, involving precision shooting at various distances, speed reloads, and movement between firing positions. Nothing flashy, just the core skills that defined proficiency with a handgun. The active duty SEALs went first, each demonstrating the exceptional level of marksmanship expected of elite operators. Their movements were fluid, their accuracy impressive, their times well above average civilian standards. The small audience watched in appreciative silence, understanding they were witnessing a level of skill few civilians ever mastered. When Jackson's turn came, the atmosphere in the range shifted. Subtly, the younger shooters expected to see a solid performance from the elderly former SEAL, respectable, perhaps impressive for his age, but naturally diminished by the decades since his prime. What they witnessed instead defied their expectations. Jackson moved through the course with an economy of motion that made the younger men's performances seem almost wasteful by comparison. Where they had speed and athleticism, he had something more fundamental, an absolute precision born of having performed these exact movements countless times in conditions they could scarcely imagine. His accuracy was flawless, his timing metronomic, his focus complete. Most striking was his absolute consistency. From first shot to last, through multiple target transitions and reloads, his performance never varied. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no corrections needed. It was as if he had internally mapped every millimeter of the course beforehand, his body following a program written decades ago but never degraded by time. When he finished, posting a time and accuracy score that had bested every one of the active duty operators, the range fell momentarily silent. Then Master Chief Blackwood began a slow, deliberate applause, joined quickly by his men and then the entire gathering. Jackson acknowledged their response with a simple nod, no more affected by their admiration than he had been by Tanner's earlier derision. He began to methodically clean his weapon, his routine unchanged despite the extraordinary circumstances. As the crowd dispersed, conversations buzzing with what they had witnessed, Blackwood approached Jackson again. "That was remarkable, sir," he said quietly. "Would it be overstepping to ask where you served? I'm guessing something beyond conventional SEAL operations." Jackson studied him for a long moment, assessing. "Detachment Bravo," he finally said, his voice low. "Early days." Blackwood's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The name meant something significant to him. "Sir, I didn't realize any of those operators were still around. What you did back then is still classified," Jackson interrupted mildly, "and best left there." Blackwood nodded, understanding immediately. "Of course, sir, I apologize." He hesitated, then added, "But I want you to know the foundation you and your teammates built. It's still the bedrock of everything we do today. The current generation stands on your shoulders, whether they know it or not." Something in Jackson's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the closest thing to it that his weathered features allowed. "They look solid," he said, nodding toward the younger SEALs. "Good fundamentals. Too many gadgets, maybe." Blackwood chuckled. "I tell them the same thing. Technology changes, human performance doesn't." He hesitated again. "Would you consider, would it be imposing to ask if you might share some insights with them? Nothing operational, just techniques, mindset, the things that don't make it into the training manuals." Jackson considered this for a long moment. After decades of deliberately avoiding his former community, of seeking anonymity and routine, the request represented a significant departure. Yet something about these young operators, their respect, their genuine desire to learn, their clear commitment to the standards he had helped establish, resonated with him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Next Saturday," he said finally, 0800, basics only." Blackwood nodded, understanding both the acceptance and its limitations. "We'll be here, sir, and thank you." As Jackson packed up his equipment to leave, he found his path to the door lined with shooters, not just the SEALs, but regular patrons of Ridgeline as well. They formed an impromptu corridor of respect, nodding silently as he passed, no one speaking or attempting to engage him further, simply acknowledging what they had witnessed. Even Tanner, standing awkwardly at the end of this gauntlet, managed a respectful nod. "Sir," he said simply, the mockery gone from his voice. Jackson regarded him briefly. "Next time, lose half those attachments," he said. "Focus on fundamentals, not hardware." Tanner nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir, I will." The following Saturday marked the beginning of a transformation at Ridgeline Shooting Complex. Jackson arrived at his usual time to find not only Blackwood and his team waiting, but also a gathering of regular patrons, all there early, all prepared to observe and learn. True to his word, Jackson focused on basics: stance, grip, sight alignment, trigger control, breathing. He spoke more that morning than many had heard from him in years, though his instruction remained characteristically spare and direct. No unnecessary explanations, no war stories, just pure distilled knowledge delivered with absolute conviction. "Accuracy is consistency," he told them. "Same grip, Same stance, same press, every time. He demonstrated techniques that had been developed through harsh trial and error in the early days of modern special operations, methods that had since been refined but whose core principles remained unchanged. His teaching style was demanding but patient, expecting excellence while understanding the path to achieving it. The active duty SEALs, already expert marksmen, found themselves humbled by the subtleties he revealed, micro-adjustments to grip, pressure, minute refinements to stance, breathing patterns synchronized perfectly with trigger press, things they had been taught, but perhaps never fully internalized as he had. Perfect practice, Jackson emphasized repeatedly, not just practice. Doing it wrong 1,000 times just makes you consistently wrong. What struck them most was how his techniques applied universally, regardless of hand size, body type, or specific equipment. The fundamentals he taught weren't just for elite operators. Civilian shooters who applied his methods saw immediate, dramatic improvements in their accuracy and consistency. Word spread. The following Saturday, the crowd at Ridgeline had doubled. The Saturday after that, they had to implement a sign-up system to manage the numbers. Jackson, initially reluctant, found himself drawn into a role he had never sought, but which somehow felt right, passing on knowledge that might otherwise be lost to time. The management of Ridgeline, recognizing the extraordinary opportunity, offered Jackson a formal position as an instructor. He declined any payment, but agreed to continue the Saturday sessions. His only stipulation was that they remain focused on fundamentals and be open to anyone willing to learn seriously, regardless of background or equipment. These Miller masterclasses, as they came to be informally known, developed a reputation that extended well beyond Clearwater. Serious shooters from neighboring states began making the pilgrimage to learn from the elderly former SEAL with the faded trident tattoo. Law enforcement officers, competitive shooters, military personnel on leave, all came to absorb what they could from his decades of experience. Tanner, much to everyone's surprise, became one of Jackson's most dedicated students. The young man's transformation was remarkable. The tactical gear gradually disappeared, replaced by practical, minimal equipment. His brash attitude gave way to focused concentration. Under Jackson's sparse but precise guidance, his skills improved dramatically, his natural talent finally finding proper direction. "Less is more," Jackson told him during one session, adjusting his stance slightly. "Economy in everything. Movement, equipment, words." Tanner nodded, absorbing the lesson that extended beyond marksmanship. "Yes, sir." Officer Rivera, whose initial request for help had inadvertently started this chain of events, became a regular presence as well. Her improved skills earned her a position as her department's firearms instructor, and she often brought colleagues to learn from Jackson. "He changed how our entire department approaches qualification," she told Garrett one day. "We're focusing on mastering fundamentals rather than just meeting minimum standards. Every officer's scores have improved." For Jackson, the experience was unexpectedly meaningful. After decades of operating in shadows, of skills applied in circumstances too classified to discuss, he found a new purpose in passing on the non-operational aspects of his knowledge. The techniques and mindset he taught saved lives in a different way now, improving the skills of law enforcement officers who might face life-or-death situations, helping military personnel prepare more effectively for deployment, ensuring civilian shooters developed safe, responsible habits. Master Chief Blackwood continued bringing teams of SEALs whenever possible, incorporating Jackson's methods into their own training regimens. "The brass is noticing the improvement in qualification scores," he mentioned one Saturday. "There's talk of formally documenting some of your techniques for the training pipeline." Jackson's response was characteristically understated. "Good fundamentals deserve to survive," he acknowledged. As months passed, the Saturday gatherings at Ridgeline evolved into something beyond mere shooting instruction. Without intending to, Jackson had created a community bound by shared respect for fundamentals, for discipline, for the pursuit of excellence without ego or shortcuts. The lessons extended beyond marksmanship. Regular participants began applying Miller principles to other aspects of their lives. The focus on fundamentals, the value of consistent practice, the discipline of doing simple things perfectly rather than complex things adequately. Law enforcement officers reported improved decision-making under stress. Military personnel found their overall performance enhanced. Even civilian shooters noticed benefits in their professional lives. "It's not just about shooting," Tanner explained to a newcomer one Saturday. "It's a mindset. Fundamentals, consistency, discipline, they work everywhere." Jackson himself remained largely unchanged, still quiet, still precise, still arriving exactly at 8 a.m. each Saturday. But those who knew him best noticed subtle differences. He spoke more, though his words remained economical. He demonstrated a dry humor occasionally. Most significantly, he seemed to have found a purpose that connected his extraordinary past with a meaningful present. On a crisp autumn morning, about 6 months after the first impromptu lesson, Jackson arrived at Ridgeline to find something unexpected. A film crew was setting up near the entrance, and a small cluster of official-looking vehicles with government plates occupied the parking lot. Garrett met him at the door, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry about this. They showed up an hour ago. Some kind of documentary team from Naval Special Warfare Command with an admiral in tow. They've heard about what you've been doing here and want to feature it in something about the evolution of SEAL training techniques." Jackson's expression darkened slightly. "Not interested in cameras," he said. "I told them that," Garrett assured him, "but they're pretty insistent on at least meeting you, the Admiral specifically. I get the impression he's not used to taking no for an answer." Before Jackson could respond, Master Chief Blackwood appeared, looking equally uncomfortable. "I had nothing to do with this, sir," he said quickly. "They contacted me last week, asking about the training revolution at Ridgeline. I tried to explain your preference for privacy, but—" Jackson studied him for a moment, then nodded, accepting the explanation. "Who's the Admiral?" "Rear Admiral Calloway," Blackwood replied, "current commander of Naval Special Warfare Command." Jackson's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered briefly in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Where is he?" "In the conference room with the documentary team. He asked to speak with you privately before they start filming anything." Jackson considered this for a long moment, then nodded once. "Talk first, then decide." Blackwood led him to the small conference room Ridgeline used for safety briefings. Inside, a tall man in his early 60s wearing the uniform of a Navy Rear Admiral stood looking at printouts of the Ranger's qualification course. He turned as Jackson entered, dismissing his aide with a gesture. "Mr. Miller," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Calloway. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Jackson shook his hand briefly. Not much choice, apparently. Calloway smiled slightly. "Direct as ever, I see. I've heard remarkable things about what you've been doing here. Transforming civilian and military shooters alike with back-to-basics instruction, even improving our current SEAL qualification scores." "Just fundamentals," Jackson said. "Nothing special." "Fundamentals taught by someone who helped write them in the first place," Calloway countered. "That makes all the difference." He paused, studying Jackson with unexpected intensity. "You don't remember me, do you?" Jackson frowned slightly, examining the Admiral more carefully. "Coronado, 1987, Calloway continued. "I was a fresh-faced ensign assigned to observe a training exercise with Detachment Bravo. You were the lead instructor, Taught me more in 3 days than I'd learned in a year of officer training. Recognition dawned slowly in Jackson's eyes. The kid who fixed the radio when it went down during the exercise. Calloway smiled broadly. You do remember. That kid eventually made admiral, largely because of what I learned from operators like you. The mindset, the attention to fundamentals, the absolute commitment to excellence. They served me well beyond tactical situations. Jackson nodded, acknowledging both the memory and its significance. Still doesn't explain the film crew. Fair enough, Calloway conceded. The documentary is real. We're capturing key moments in the evolution of naval special warfare training, but it's not why I'm here. He hesitated, then continued with careful precision. What you've created here, almost accidentally, is addressing a gap we've been struggling with in the teams, the transmission of fundamental skills that don't translate well to manuals or formal instruction. The tribal knowledge that veterans like you possess, but that risks being lost as new technology and tactics dominate training time. They can learn here on Saturdays like everyone else, Jackson said simply. They could, Calloway agreed. But what about the thousands who can't make it to Clearwater? What you're teaching deserves to be preserved, documented, made available to future generations of operators and support personnel. Jackson's expression remained skeptical, not interested in becoming a training video star. I understand your preference for privacy, Calloway said. Your service record remains classified for good reason. Your operations with detachment. Bravo changed the course of conflicts most Americans never even knew were happening. You've earned your anonymity. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. What if we documented the techniques without featuring you personally? Focus on the methods, the principles. Preserve the knowledge without exposing the source. Jackson considered this, his weathered features giving little away. What's the real objective here, Admiral? Calloway smiled slightly at the direct question. 2 things. First, genuine preservation of knowledge that risks being lost, the fundamentals that made operators like you legendary. Second, he hesitated, then committed to honesty, reconnection. Naval Special Warfare's current generation is technologically advanced, physically exceptional, but sometimes disconnected from the foundations you and your peers established. This is an opportunity to bridge that gap, to remind them that beneath the advanced equipment and tactics are timeless principles established by men like you. Jackson weighed the Admiral's words carefully. The decades of operational security ingrained in his nature, warring with the unexpected opportunity before him. Preserving knowledge that might otherwise fade away had an appeal he hadn't anticipated feeling at this stage of his life. No personal history, he stipulated after a long moment. No operational details, just the fundamentals. Calloway nodded, understanding the boundaries. Agreed. Techniques, principles, mindset. Nothing that identifies you beyond your first name or connects to classified operations. And the Saturday sessions continue as they are, Jackson added, open to anyone serious about learning. Of course, Calloway agreed readily. What you've built here is valuable precisely because it crosses boundaries, military, law enforcement, civilian. That's part of what makes it special. Jackson considered for another moment, then gave a single decisive nod. Acceptable terms. The relief on Calloway's face was evident. Thank you. This means more than you know to the current generation. He extended his hand again, which Jackson shook briefly. The film crew is prepared to work around your preferences, capture the instruction without interfering or making you perform for the camera. They stay back, Jackson said. No staging, no retakes, just document what happens naturally. Understood. They've been thoroughly briefed on naval special warfare protocols for media. They know the boundaries. As Jackson left the conference room, he found the regular Saturday crowd had gathered. Their expressions, a mixture of curiosity and concern. The presence of official vehicles and a film crew had created a buzz of speculation. Tanner, now a fixture of the inner circle, approached. Hesitantly, "Everything okay, Mr. Miller?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Jackson nodded, documenting the training. "Nothing changes." The simple reassurance spread quickly through the gathered shooters, easing the tension. The arrival of a two-man film crew with modest equipment was met with initial wariness that gradually dissolved as they maintained a respectful distance, capturing the instruction without intrusion. That Saturday session proceeded with remarkable normalcy, despite the extraordinary circumstances. Jackson, true to his nature, conducted his instruction exactly as he always had. Direct, focused on fundamentals, demanding excellence while remaining patient with the learning process. If the presence of cameras and an admiral observing from the sidelines affected him, it was imperceptible in his demeanor. What became clear as the session progressed was the depth of knowledge Jackson possessed beyond mere marksmanship. As he guided shooters through exercises, he naturally incorporated elements of breath control, stress management, and mental focus that transcended the mechanical aspects of shooting. "Mind controls the body," he told a group working on managing trigger control under pressure. "Body wants to rush, to tense. Mind must override, calm center, even when everything around you isn't." These principles, delivered without drama or elaboration, carried the weight of experience far beyond civilian shooting ranges. The film crew captured these moments with particular attention, recognizing the rare insight into the psychological aspects of elite performance under pressure. During a break, Admiral Calloway approached Jackson again, observing as he made minute adjustments to a shooter's grip. "You know," Calloway said quietly, "what you're teaching goes well beyond marksmanship. These are life principles disguised as shooting techniques." Jackson considered this observation. "Skills are perishable," he replied. "Mindset endures." "Exactly," Calloway agreed. "That's what the newer generations sometimes miss in their focus on equipment and tactics. The mental discipline, the approach to challenges, those transcend any specific operation or environment." As the day progressed, the documentary team captured not just Jackson's instruction, but the community that had formed around it. They interviewed participants about the impact of his teaching, revealing a pattern that extended far beyond improved shooting scores. "I applied his principles to my emergency room protocols," the doctor explained. "Focus on fundamentals, eliminate wasted movement, maintain calm under pressure. Patient outcomes improved measurably." His methods transformed our SWAT team's approach to high-stress scenarios, a police lieutenant added. "We're calmer, more precise, more effective, and ultimately safer both for ourselves and civilians." Even Tanner, now nearly unrecognizable from the brash young man who had mocked Jackson months earlier, spoke with surprising eloquence. "Mr. Miller taught me that mastery isn't about having the most expensive equipment or looking the part. It's about perfect execution of fundamentals, consistency, and mental discipline. I've applied that to everything from my shooting to my college studies. My entire life has improved." By day's end, the film crew had captured something far more significant than they had initially anticipated. Not just shooting techniques from a veteran operator, but a philosophy of excellence that transcended any specific skill set. Admiral Calloway, observing the final session, nodded with satisfaction. "This is exactly what the current generation needs to see," he told his aide quietly. "Not just how to shoot better, but how to be better." As the range closed and participants dispersed, Calloway approached Jackson one final time. "I want to thank you again," he said. "What you've shared today will benefit operators for generations to come." Jackson nodded, acknowledging the comment without elaboration. "There's one more thing," Calloway continued, somewhat hesitantly. Naval Special Warfare Command holds an annual gathering for distinguished veterans of the teams, both active and retired operators who have made exceptional contributions. It's a private event, no media, no publicity. I'd like to extend a personal invitation to you for this year's gathering. Jackson's expression remained impassive, but something flickered briefly in his eyes. Perhaps surprise, perhaps uncertainty. "Not one for ceremonies," he said. "It's not a ceremony," Calloway assured him. "Just a gathering of men who share a unique bond. No speeches, no formal recognition, just the opportunity to connect with those who walked similar paths, both before and after your time." Jackson didn't respond immediately, the invitation clearly triggering complex emotions beneath his controlled exterior. After a long moment, he asked simply, "When?" "3 weeks from now. San Diego. Everything arranged discreetly, of course." Calloway handed him a simple business card with a private number. "Consider it. That's all I ask." After the Admiral departed and the film crew packed their equipment, Jackson remained at the now empty range, methodically cleaning his pistol as was his invariable habit. Garrett, finishing his closing duties, approached cautiously. "Quite a day," he observed. "Never thought I'd see an admiral at ridgeline." Jackson continued his cleaning, his movements precise and economical. "Life has surprises," Garrett nodded, recognizing that this might be the closest Jackson ever came to expressing astonishment. "The documentary, do you think it will change things here?" Jackson considered the question. "Shouldn't. Fundamentals remain fundamentals, regardless who's watching." The following weeks saw subtle but significant changes at Ridgeline. The documentary team returned several times, expanding their scope to capture the full breadth of Jackson's instruction. What had begun as a simple recording of shooting techniques evolved into a more comprehensive exploration of the mindset and principles that had defined the early years of modern special operations. Jackson, initially reluctant, gradually adjusted to their presence. While he never performed for the cameras or altered his teaching to accommodate them, he began to share more deliberately the mental aspects of his training, the psychological tools that had allowed operators like him to function under conditions that would break most men. "Control your breathing, you control your heart rate," he explained to a group working on precision shooting under time pressure. "Control your heart rate, you control your fine motor skills. Control your fine motor skills, you maintain accuracy. It's all connected." These insights, delivered without drama or embellishment, carried the weight of experience earned in circumstances too classified to discuss openly. The film crew captured these moments with particular attention, recognizing their value beyond the specific context of marksmanship. As the date of the Naval Special Warfare Gathering approached, those closest to Jackson noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. There was a quiet tension in his movements, an occasional distant look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. For a man whose life had been defined by absolute control and compartmentalization, the prospect of reconnecting with his former community clearly stirred complex emotions. Tanner, who had become something of an informal assistant during the Saturday sessions, finally gathered the courage to ask about it during a rare moment alone. "Mr. Miller," he began hesitantly, "is everything okay? You seem different lately." Jackson regarded him with his usual impassive expression, but after a moment offered a rare personal insight. "Facing ghosts," he said simply. "Old memories." Tanner nodded, understanding the significance of even this minimal disclosure from a man so private. "Are you going to the gathering in San Diego?" Jackson was silent for so long that Tanner thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "Still deciding." The decision came unexpectedly, triggered by an encounter the following Saturday. Among the regular participants was a new face, a man in his 30s using a wheelchair, his military bearing evident despite his disability. He approached Jackson after the formal instruction had ended. "Mr. Miller," he said, extending his hand. "Lieutenant Commander James Harris. Admiral Calloway suggested I might find your instruction valuable." Jackson shook his hand, noting the strength of the grip despite the man's condition. "Welcome to Ridgeline. I'm the new head of marksmanship training at the Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL School," Harris explained. "Was an operator with SEAL Team 4 until this happened." He gestured briefly to his legs. "Afghanistan, 2018. Jackson nodded, requiring no further explanation. The cost of service needed no elaboration between men who understood its reality. "Admiral Calloway mentioned you might be considering attending the gathering," Harris continued. "I wanted to personally encourage you to come. The newer generations, my generation, we've benefited from the foundation built by operators. Like you, often without fully understanding its origins." Jackson studied him with renewed interest. "Plenty of qualified instructors at BUDS," he observed. "Don't need an old-timer's input." Harris smiled slightly. "With respect, sir, that's not entirely accurate. We have excellent tactical instructors, cutting-edge equipment, advanced techniques. What we sometimes lack is connection to the core principles that defined the teams before technology became so dominant." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "The fundamentals you teach here, they're saving lives downrange, not just through improved marksmanship, but through the mindset that accompanies it." Something in Harris's earnest assessment seemed to reach Jackson in a way that Calloway's more formal invitation had not. Here was living proof of the continuity between generations of operators, a man who had paid a severe price in service, yet remained committed to preparing those who would follow. "We'll consider it," Jackson said finally, with a nod that carried more weight than his sparse words. Harris smiled, understanding the significance. "That's all anyone can ask, sir." As Harris wheeled away to observe the remaining shooters, Garrett approached Jackson. "Powerful endorsement," he commented. Jackson nodded slightly. "Man earned the right to be heard." The decision, when finally made, was communicated with characteristic brevity. The following Tuesday, Jackson called the number Calloway had provided and left a simple message: "Miller will attend." The Naval Special Warfare Gathering was held at a private facility near Coronado, the spiritual home of the SEAL teams. Security was tight but discreet, the event intentionally low-key, despite the distinguished nature of its attendees. Operators from Vietnam to Afghanistan, representing every era of modern special operations, mingled without ceremony or formal hierarchy. Jackson arrived precisely on time, dressed simply in slacks and a button-down shirt, nothing to distinguish him from any other retired veteran, except perhaps the exceptional straightness of his posture and the watchful alertness in his eyes. Admiral Calloway greeted him personally at the entrance. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming," he said, genuine appreciation evident in his voice. "No formalities as promised. Just an opportunity to connect with those who share a unique experience." Jackson nodded, taking in the gathering with a quick, comprehensive glance, the automatic situational awareness of a man trained to assess environments instantly. What he saw was surprising in its diversity. Operators of different eras, ages, and backgrounds, united by the shared experience of having earned the trident and served in the teams. As he moved through the room, a pattern emerged that Jackson hadn't anticipated. Younger operators, upon learning who he was, approached with a respect bordering on reverence, eager to connect with a living link to the foundations of their community. Older veterans, particularly those who recognized the significance of detachment, "Bravo!" greeted him with the quiet acknowledgement of peers who understood exactly what his service had entailed. "Your work at Ridgeline has been making waves through the entire special operations community," one senior officer told him. we've incorporated elements of your teaching methodology into our current CQB curriculum. The documentary footage is already being used in our mental management training, another added. Your approach to stress control under fire, it's something we've been trying to articulate for years. What struck Jackson most powerfully was how his reluctant return to teaching had created connections across generations of operators. Men who had served in classified operations decades apart found common ground in the fundamentals he emphasized, the universal principles that transcended specific weapons, tactics, or eras. Late in the evening, in a quiet corner of the gathering, Jackson found himself in conversation with a small group that spanned the history of naval special warfare, from Vietnam-era operators near his own age to recently returned Afghanistan veterans. The discussion had turned to how the mental aspects of training had evolved over the decades. The technology changes, the geography changes, an older operator observed, but the core mental challenge remains identical: performing with precision under conditions designed to prevent it. That's where Mr. Miller's methods have been so valuable, Lieutenant Commander Harris added, having joined the conversation, reconnecting us with fundamentals that never become obsolete. A younger operator, recently returned from his third deployment, nodded in agreement. We get so caught up in new tactics and equipment sometimes that we lose sight of the basics. My shooting improved more in one session at Ridgeline than in 3 years of advanced training. Jackson, who had been listening more than speaking, as was his nature, finally offered a rare personal insight. Learned most valuable lessons from my first team leader, he said quietly. Vietnam veteran, never wasted emotion. Never wasted a word. Everything essential, nothing extra. He paused, then added, tried to honor that approach. The simple statement, from a man so typically reserved, created a momentary silence in the group. The acknowledgement of his own mentorship, of the continuity between generations of warriors, carried special weight coming from someone of his background and experience. That's the legacy that matters, Admiral Calloway said, having joined the circle unnoticed. Not just the operations themselves, classified though they may be, but the transmission of wisdom from one generation to the next, the preservation of principles that work regardless of time or technology. As the evening progressed, Jackson found himself drawn into conversations he would never have anticipated. Discussions about training methodology, about maintaining mental clarity under extreme pressure, about the balance between technological advancement and fundamental skills. To his surprise, he discovered a certain satisfaction in these exchanges, a sense of completion in connecting his past experience with current and future operations. Near the end of the gathering, Admiral Calloway approached him one final time. I wanted to show you something before you leave, he said, leading Jackson to a small side room. Inside was a preview of the documentary that had been compiled from the footage at Ridgeline. What Jackson saw wasn't the personality-focused production he had feared, but rather a thoughtful exploration of the fundamental principles he taught, their historical context, and their application across different operational environments. The film captured not just shooting techniques, but the deeper philosophy underlying them. The mental discipline, the commitment to fundamentals, the pursuit of consistency under pressure. His face was rarely shown, his voice presented without identification beyond Jackson, former SEAL instructor, exactly as agreed. Most powerful were the testimonials from those who had benefited from his teaching. Law enforcement officers whose improved skills had saved lives in critical situations, military personnel who had applied his principles in combat, even civilians who had found broader applications for his methodology. This will be used in training across all special operations forces, Calloway explained, not just for marksmanship, but as an example of the mindset that defines elite operators, your legacy preserved without compromising your privacy. Jackson watched in silence, his expression revealing little, but something in his posture suggested a quiet satisfaction. When the preview ended, he offered a single nod of approval. "Acceptable," he said, which from him constituted high praise. As he prepared to leave the gathering, Jackson found himself approached by a final group, 3 elderly men, whose bearing and subtle physical tells marked them as veterans of the earliest SEAL teams. One extended his hand. "Jackson Miller," he said, not as a question but as recognition. "Charlie Peterson. We never worked together directly, but I knew of Detachment Bravo. What you boys did," he shook his head slightly, "changed the game for all of us." Jackson shook his hand, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Your work in Vietnam laid our foundation," he acknowledged. "That's how it should be," Peterson replied with a slight smile. "Each generation building on the last. The quiet professionals, passing the torch without fanfare." Another of the elderly operators nodded in agreement. "Or what you're doing now, teaching those fundamentals at that civilian range, it's as important as any operation you ever ran. Maybe more so. You're ensuring the core of what makes the team special doesn't get lost in all the technology and politics." The third man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "We all fade eventually," he said quietly. "The body gives out. The operations become classified history. But what endures are the principles, the mindset, the standard of excellence. That's the true legacy worth preserving." As Jackson drove back to his quiet home in Clearwater that night, these words resonated in ways he hadn't anticipated. For decades, he had viewed his retirement as a withdrawal, a disconnection from his former life and community. The Saturday sessions at Ridgeline had begun as simply maintaining his own skills, a private discipline that had unexpectedly expanded into something much more significant. What he now recognized, with the clarity that sometimes comes only through the perspective of others, was that his reluctant return to teaching had created a bridge between his classified past and a meaningful present. The fundamentals he preserved weren't just techniques, but a philosophy of excellence, a standard of performance under pressure that transcended specific operations or eras. The quiet old man at the gun range had found in his final chapter a purpose that honored his past while serving the future, not through grand gestures or public recognition, but through the patient transmission of hard-earned wisdom to those who would carry it forward. The documentary about Jackson Miller's teaching methods premiered 6 months later at a closed screening for Naval Special Warfare personnel. Though Jackson declined to attend, preferring his usual Saturday at Ridgeline, Admiral Calloway ensured he received a private copy and a detailed report of the response. "The impact has been immediate and profound," Calloway wrote in his accompanying note. "Current SEAL qualification scores have improved 23% since implementing your methodologies. More importantly, the mental management techniques you demonstrated are being incorporated into pre-deployment training, with measurable improvements in operator performance under stress." Jackson read this with his customary impassivity, though those who knew him best might have detected a subtle satisfaction in the slight relaxation of his usually rigid posture. The validation mattered less to him than the knowledge that principles he valued would continue influencing future generations. As winter turned to spring, Jackson's Saturday sessions at Ridgeline evolved in unexpected ways. What had begun as informal instruction became more structured, with different groups arriving at scheduled times based on skill level and background. Law enforcement came early, military personnel mid-morning, civilians in the afternoon. Jackson, with characteristic efficiency, adapted his teaching to each group's specific needs, while maintaining his emphasis on universal fundamentals. Pressure is pressure, he told a group of SWAT officers working on shooting while physically stressed. Source doesn't matter, response does. Control breathing, control performance. The simple principle, delivered without embellishment, carried the weight of experience earned in circumstances these officers could scarcely imagine. Yet its application was immediately relevant to their own high-stress environments. Tanner, now a fixture at these sessions, had developed into something of an assistant instructor, helping demonstrate techniques and working with beginners. His transformation from the brash, gear-obsessed young man who had mocked Jackson to a focused, disciplined shooter embodied the impact of Jackson's teaching beyond mere marksmanship. "Your approach changed everything for me," Tanner told Jackson during a rare, quiet moment between groups. "Not just my shooting, my whole mindset, how I approach problems, how I handle pressure in school and work." Jackson nodded, acknowledging the comment without elaboration, though those who knew him well might have detected a flicker of approval in his typically guarded expression. As Ridgeline's reputation grew, so did the diversity of those seeking Jackson's instruction. Olympic shooting teams, specialized military units beyond the SEALs, even corporate executives looking to apply his mental management techniques to business pressure, all found value in the fundamental principles he taught. What remained constant was Jackson's approach. No concessions to status or background, no watering down of standards, no wasted motion or words. Whether teaching a champion athlete or a civilian novice, he demanded the same disciplined focus on fundamentals, the same commitment to perfect practice. "Excellence isn't complicated," he often said. "It's demanding, different standard." This philosophy, coupled with his obvious mastery, created an environment where diverse individuals found common ground in the pursuit of excellence. The Saturday gatherings became a unique community, united not by background or purpose, but by shared commitment to a standard of performance. One Saturday in late spring, Jackson arrived at Ridgeline to find an unexpected visitor waiting, a slender, serious-looking man in his 50s with the unmistakable bearing of career intelligence. He introduced himself simply as Clark from Langley, offering a business card with minimal information and a government seal. "Admiral Calloway suggested I observe your methods firsthand," he explained. "We're revising certain training protocols, and your approach has generated significant interest." Jackson assessed him with a quick, comprehensive glance, noting the subtle indicators of a man accustomed to operating in sensitive environments. "Observation only," he stipulated. Clark nodded, understanding the boundary. "Of course, I'm here to learn, not interfere." Throughout that day's sessions, Clark observed with quiet intensity, taking no notes, but clearly missing nothing. During a break, he approached Jackson again. "Your methods align remarkably well with what our psychologists have been advocating," he commented. "Particularly the integration of breathing control with decision-making under pressure. But seeing it demonstrated makes the theoretical practical." Jackson nodded slightly, acknowledging the observation without elaboration. "Would you consider consulting on a revised training program?" Clark asked directly. "Nothing operational, strictly methodology. Your identity would remain protected naturally." Jackson studied him for a long moment, weighing the request. "What's the objective?" "Improving performance under extreme pressure," Clark replied. "Our personnel face unique stressors. Technical training is excellent, but the mental management component needs refinement. Your approach bridges that gap in ways our conventional instructors haven't achieved." Jackson considered this, then asked with characteristic directness, "Why me specifically? Plenty of qualified instructors available." Clark's response was equally direct. "Because your methods aren't theoretical. They were developed and tested in operational environments similar to what our personnel face. And because you teach principles that transcend specific scenarios, fundamentals that work regardless of circumstances." After a measured silence, Jackson gave a single nod. "Will consider it. Need details." This unexpected opportunity represented a significant departure from Jackson's carefully structured routine, yet it also offered a chance to extend his influence beyond Ridgeline, to ensure that the hard-earned wisdom of his generation wouldn't be lost in the increasingly technological focus of modern specialized training. 2 weeks later, after receiving and meticulously reviewing a detailed proposal, Jackson agreed to a limited consulting role. The arrangement was characteristically precise. He would review training materials and provide guidance on mental management techniques, but would not travel to Langley or appear in any official capacity. His identity would remain protected, his involvement known only to those with direct need to know. This new responsibility didn't diminish his commitment to Ridgeline. The Saturday sessions continued unchanged, his instruction as focused and demanding as ever, but those closest to him noticed subtle shifts in his approach, an increased emphasis on mental resilience, on decision-making under ambiguous conditions, on maintaining clarity when information was incomplete or misleading. "Mind is primary weapon," he told a mixed group of advanced shooters one Saturday. "Hardware fails, technology fails, trained mind adapts, overcomes." These principles, woven naturally into his marksmanship instruction, reflected the insights he was simultaneously incorporating into specialized training programs for personnel who operated in environments where mistakes carried extreme consequences. As summer approached, Jackson received an unexpected call from Lieutenant Commander Harris, the wheelchair-using SEAL instructor he had met at the Naval Special Warfare Gathering. "Mr. Miller," Harris began, "I'm calling with a rather unusual request. Bud S Class 357 is approaching Hell Week, and their performance metrics are concerning. High initial potential, but struggling with mental resilience. Our command is considering something unprecedented, bringing in an outside perspective to address them briefly before they begin the crucible." Jackson's silence prompted Harris to continue. "Your name was the first and only one suggested, not for tactical instruction, but for the mental management principles you've been teaching. These candidates have all the physical tools, but many lack the psychological framework to apply them under extreme pressure." Jackson considered this carefully. Hell Week, the defining crucible of SEAL training, tested mental fortitude far more than physical capability. The psychological approach candidates brought into that experience often determined whether they succeeded or failed. "Not one for speeches," he said finally. "We're not looking for a speech," Harris assured him, "just a brief, direct transmission of wisdom from someone who's walked the path these candidates aspire to follow. 20 minutes of substance rather than hours of motivation." After a long pause, Jackson asked, "When?" The following week found Jackson at the Bud's training facility in Coronado, standing before Class 357 in their final preparation before Hell Week. The candidates, already exhausted from weeks of intensive training, regarded the elderly visitor with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Few recognized the significance of the faded tattoo partially visible beneath his rolled sleeve. Master Chief Blackwood, who had arranged the logistical details, introduced him with deliberate understatement. "This is Mr. Miller, former operator, with significant experience in environments more demanding than what you're about to face. He has agreed to share some insights about mental management under extreme pressure." Jackson surveyed the class with a penetrating gaze that seemed to assess each candidate individually. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried effortlessly across the room, forcing them to focus intently to catch every word. "Hell Week tests one thing," he began without preamble. "Not strength, not endurance. Will, the decision to continue when every signal tells you to stop." He paced slowly, his movements economical, his eyes constantly scanning the group. Your mind will find logical reasons to quit, convincing ones. Physical pain, sleep deprivation, hypothermia, all legitimate reasons, all irrelevant. The room had fallen completely silent, the candidates leaning forward almost unconsciously, sensing the rare authenticity of someone who had endured what they were about to face. Success isn't complicated, Jackson continued. It's simple but demanding. Control your breathing, you control your heart rate. Control your heart rate, you control your stress response. Control your stress response, you make rational decisions. Under irrational circumstances. He stopped pacing, fixing them with an intensity that belied his age. The body can endure far more than the mind believes possible. The decision to continue is made one evolution at a time, 1 hour at a time, sometimes one breath at a time. Jackson reached down and picked up a length of rope that had been placed nearby, standard issue for the various training evolutions. You'll reach points where failure seems inevitable. When those moments come, focus on one simple task. Make this knot correctly. Complete this swim, help your teammate, nothing beyond that immediate action. He demonstrated with practiced hands, tying a perfect knot despite not having done so in training for decades. Perfect execution of basic skills under extreme duress. That's what separates those who succeed from those who fail. Not superior, strength or speed, mental clarity when everything around you is chaos. Jackson set the rope down and surveyed the class once more. The most important decision you'll make isn't at the moment of greatest pain or exhaustion. It's right now, setting the standard you will hold yourself to when those moments come. He paused, then delivered his final thought with quiet conviction. Those who succeed make one fundamental choice. The temporary pain of continuing is preferable to the permanent regret of quitting. Make that decision now, reaffirm it with every evolution, and your body will find a way to follow where your mind leads. With that, he nodded to Master Chief Blackwood and stepped aside, his brief but powerful address complete. The impact on the candidates was palpable. A new intensity in their expressions, a straightening of posture despite their fatigue, a sense of focused purpose that hadn't been there before. As Jackson departed, Blackwood accompanied him to the waiting car. That was exactly what they needed, he said. Not motivation, but clarity. A framework for the mental challenge ahead. Jackson nodded slightly. They'll still find their own limits. Can't change that. But you've given them tools to push those limits further, Blackwood responded. That will make the difference for several who might otherwise have failed. 1 week later, Jackson received a brief, encrypted message from Blackwood. Class, 357 Hell Week completion rate, 15% above historical average. Mental management techniques applied successfully by multiple candidates during critical decision points. Your impact extends beyond what you can see. This simple validation carried more meaning for Jackson than any formal recognition. The knowledge that principles he had lived by, refined through experiences too classified to discuss, would continue shaping future generations of operators, represented a legacy more significant than any medal or commendation. As the documentary about his teaching methods circulated through specialized training environments, and his consulting work extended to multiple agencies, Jackson maintained his routine at Ridgeline with unwavering consistency. The Saturday sessions continued unchanged, his standards as exacting as ever, his instruction as focused on fundamentals. What evolved, however, was the community that formed around these sessions. What had begun as a loose gathering of individual shooters developed into something more cohesive, a group united by shared commitment to excellence, regardless of background or purpose. Law enforcement officers trained alongside military personnel, competitive shooters alongside self-defense-focused civilians, each finding value in Jackson's uncompromising approach to fundamentals. Tanner, whose transformation from brash novice to disciplined shooter embodied Jackson's influence, had developed into an effective instructor in his own right. His natural enthusiasm, now channeled through disciplined expertise, complemented Jackson's more austere approach. Together, they created a balanced learning environment that met diverse needs while maintaining unwavering standards. The principles. "Mr. Miller teaches saved my life," a police officer told the group one Saturday, describing a high-stress encounter where his training had enabled him to maintain precision under extreme pressure. Not just the shooting techniques, but the mental management, controlling my breathing, focusing on fundamentals when everything was chaos around me. Such testimonials became increasingly common as Jackson's students applied his methods in real-world situations. Competitive shooters winning national championships, military personnel performing under combat conditions, civilians maintaining clarity during crisis situations. What remained consistent was Jackson's response to such acknowledgments. A simple nod, perhaps a brief comment on specific technique, never taking credit for outcomes that resulted from the individual's own application of principles he taught. "You did the work," he would say. "I just pointed the direction." This humility, coupled with his undeniable mastery, only deepened the respect he commanded. Those who trained with him regularly understood that Jackson Miller embodied the principles. He taught excellence without ego, precision without pretense, expertise without arrogance. As his influence extended beyond Ridgeline, through the documentary and his consulting work, Jackson found himself approached by publishers seeking to capture his methods in book form. He declined most such offers, preferring the direct transmission of knowledge through hands-on instruction. But one proposal resonated: a technical manual focused purely on fundamentals, with no personal narrative or identification beyond methods developed through specialized military experience. Working with a writer who understood both shooting and operational security, Jackson developed a slim but comprehensive guide that distilled decades of experience into essential principles. Performance under pressure, fundamental skills for critical situations, contained no biographical information about its primary source, no operational details, no war stories, just pure practical methodology for maintaining precision when circumstances most work against it. Published with minimal fanfare, the manual quickly became standard reference material for specialized units, competitive shooters, and serious civilian enthusiasts. Its value lay in its clarity, its focus on fundamentals that transcended specific equipment or scenarios, and its integration of physical technique with mental management. 1 year after Jackson's first impromptu lesson at Ridgeline, Admiral Calloway visited the range on a Saturday to observe the evolved training environment. He watched with evident satisfaction as Jackson moved from group to group, making minute adjustments to stance or grip, offering sparse but precise guidance on breathing control, demonstrating perfect execution of fundamentals that remained unchanged. "Despite decades of technological advancement, you've created something remarkable here," Calloway commented during a break. "A living repository of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost between generations." Jackson acknowledged this assessment with a slight nod. "Fundamentals deserve to survive." "They're doing more than surviving," Calloway observed. "They're thriving. The methods you're teaching here have been incorporated into every level of naval special warfare training, from Bud-S candidates to the most advanced teams. The impact on operational effectiveness has been measurable and significant." For Jackson, this represented the completion of a circle he hadn't consciously sought to draw. The techniques and mindset that had defined his operational career, refined through experiences too classified to discuss openly, would continue shaping future generations long after he was gone. As the day's sessions concluded, Jackson found himself approached by a young man he didn't recognize, perhaps 18 or 19, with the focused intensity of someone who had already set his life's direction. "Mr. Miller," the young man began, with respectful directness. "My name's Ryan Coleman. My father served with you in Detachment Bravo, Thomas Coleman." Jackson's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered briefly in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or memory. He studied the young man more carefully, noting the resemblance to an operator he had indeed served with decades earlier. "He spoke of you rarely, but with great respect," Ryan continued. "Said you taught him everything that mattered about performance under pressure, about maintaining precision when circumstances worked against it." He paused, then added, "He passed away last year. Before he died, he told me if I was serious about following his path into the teams, I should find you first. Said learning from you would give me a foundation nothing else could provide." Jackson was silent for a long moment, his weathered features giving little away. Then he asked simply, "Your goals?" "Bud S. next year, sir. I've been preparing physically, but my father emphasized that the mental component would determine success or failure." Jackson nodded once, acknowledging both the goal and the insight. "Your father was correct. Be here next Saturday, 0700, before the regular session." Ryan straightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As the young man departed, Admiral Calloway, who had observed the exchange, approached Jackson again. "Thomas Coleman's son," he remarked. "That's a powerful connection across generations." Jackson nodded slightly. "Continuity matters." "That's what you've created here," Calloway observed. "Not just technical instruction, but the transmission of a legacy, a standard of excellence that transcends individual careers or operations." As the range emptied and the day concluded, Jackson remained for his customary final practice session, methodical, focused, each shot executed with the same precision he had demonstrated decades earlier when lives depended on his performance. Garrett, closing up the range, watched with the same appreciation he had shown since Jackson's first appearance at Ridgeline years ago. "You know," Garrett commented, "when you first started shooting here, I knew you were different. The precision, the focus, it was obvious you weren't just another retiree maintaining a hobby. But I never imagined all this." He gestured to encompass the now empty range that had been transformed by Jackson's presence. Jackson continued his methodical practice, acknowledging Garrett's comment with a slight nod. "I've been managing ranges for 20 years, Garrett continued. "Seen all kinds of shooters, all kinds of instructors. Never seen anyone have the impact you've had, not just on shooting skills, but on people themselves. The way they approach challenges, the way they handle pressure, the standards they hold themselves to." Jackson finished his final sequence, each shot finding its mark with unwavering consistency. As he began his ritual cleaning of the weapon, he offered a rare personal reflection. "Never sought to teach," he said quietly, "just to maintain standards. The rest happened on its own." "That's what makes it authentic," Garrett observed. "You never tried to create a following or build a reputation. You just embodied excellence, so consistently that others naturally wanted to learn from your example." As Jackson prepared to leave, Garrett added, "Thomas Coleman's son showing up. That seems significant, like things coming full circle." Jackson considered this, then nodded slightly. "Next generation," he acknowledged. "Different challenges, same fundamentals." Driving home that evening, Jackson reflected on the unexpected path his retirement had taken. What had begun as a solitary pursuit of maintaining skills had evolved into something far more significant, a bridge between generations, a transmission of hard-earned wisdom that might otherwise have been lost. The quiet old man at the gun range had found, in his final chapter, a purpose that honored his past while serving the future, not through grand gestures or public recognition, but through the patient, precise teaching of fundamentals that transcended time and technology. His legacy would continue not in medals or monuments, but in the performance of those who carried his principles forward. Operators making critical decisions under pressure, officers maintaining precision in chaotic environments, civilians facing personal crises with clarity and control, excellence without ego, precision without pretense, standards that never wavered regardless of circumstances. These were the true lessons of Jackson Miller's life, embodied first in his own performance and now transmitted to future generations who would never know the classified details of his service but would carry forward its essential wisdom. As he pulled into his driveway, Jackson noticed a simple envelope in his mailbox, hand-delivered, no postmark. Inside was a black and white photograph showing a young operator in Vietnam-era uniform standing beside an equally young Jackson. Miller. On the back, in faded handwriting, were the words, "Detachment Bravo, Initial Qualification 1975, the Standard Bearers." With it was a brief note from Thomas Coleman's widow. "Ryan told me he found you. Thank you for agreeing to teach him. Tom always said no one understood the fundamentals like you did. Those fundamentals saved his life more times than I can count. They'll serve our son well, whatever path he chooses." Jackson studied the photograph for a long moment, memories of operations long classified flooding back. Missions where precision meant survival, where the fundamentals he now taught had been forged in circumstances few could imagine. Then, he carefully placed it in his desk drawer beside his faded service records and prepared for the next day's instruction. The quiet old man at the gun range had broken every record, but his true legacy wasn't in the targets he hit or the operations he completed. It was in the standards he maintained and transmitted, the unwavering commitment to excellence that would continue shaping performance long after the details of his service faded into classified history. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.